Hey everyone, and welcome to another Crossing Darkness podcast. This is season 2, episode 4. I'm your host, Frozen Fallout, and with me is Motor Rory.
Hi, everybody.
We are broadcasting over Twitch Sundays 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, and are open with chatting with the fans during the show. We're gonna kind of be a little bit free form with this. We have a little bit of an agenda on what we're going to be talking about. We're going to focus a little bit on creating a game, and a setting, and basically try doing more world building here in the World of Darkness, but getting a little bit more, digging deeper into it, and being a little bit more focused today than we were on our last podcast here. Um, so actually, Mike, do you want to kind of go into um, what the base idea of what you're going to be talking about here today?
Uh, so I'm going to talk about a werewolf game that I designed a few years ago, but never ran. Unfortunately, might run it in the future. We don't know. It's a werewolf game set in the '60s inside our Madison Under Siege mythos.
Oh, goodness.
Is that enough? You want more, or is that cat messing with you?
It's my cat's messing with me right now, so go ahead to continue.
You want me to just
Yeah, go
do the
ahead.
whole thing?
Well, yeah, just jump into your portion right now. 1 second here.
Oh, okay. Um, Okay, so the Madison Under Siege mythos is based in Madison, obviously, and the original game was set in the early 2010s, and we also did I believe, some games that were set in the 90s, but I honestly can't remember at this point. Um, but at one point, I had the idea of taking some historical events that happened in Madison and translating them into the world of darkness and trying to figure out, like, okay, how would that have happened in the world of darkness, and how could I run a game surrounding that? So this particular game happens in the '60s. It is basically the climax happens during the bombing of Sterling Hall. Do you remember
Oh
what that
yeah,
is about, Josh?
yeah, I do
Yeah.
remember. That
So
was
so at the height of the protests against the Vietnam War in the late '60s, I believe it was the Weather Underground. I can't be entirely sure. I'd have to check my notes that I can't find. But they bombed Sterling Hall because Sterling Hall was, I think it wasn't a contract, but it was something to do with a military like tie-in. It was the math department was doing some work for the Defense Department, and so they said we're gonna bomb Sterling Hall, and it probably wouldn't have been a big deal, but somebody died. It was a grad student that was working late, like it was like 3 in the morning or something. Uh, so I decided, well, what if that wasn't the bombing done by the Weather Underground? What if it was something else? So I'm going a lot from memory here. The basic idea is there's a young female werewolf in Madison who goes through her first change a couple years beforehand. And then over the course of 2 years, you kind of play a series of games as the werewolves of Madison that eventually leads to the discovery that this girl has been corrupted by a worm spirit, and the final confrontation with her new form happens at Sterling Hall, and the explanation after the fact is, of course, that the technocracy came in and covered it up. But now, as the players of this game, you would now know what really happened. Uh, and so you get to play various werewolves in charge of the different tribes in the area. So I would come up with, who was in charge of the Silver Fangs in that era. Uh, Perhaps are there any old werewolves that are currently in our setting in the 2000s or late 90s who might have been young at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. The most fun that I had researching it was trying to figure out what music to play during games, because the 60s, of course, was huge for music, especially protest music. Everything you hear on an oldies station is from that era. Well, a lot of it, at least. So I did a lot of research into that, and that really fits into the theme that I was trying to push with that game, which I wrote it down: the innocuous nature of corruption versus the appropriateness of redemption. Like, how much was it that this person was corrupted, this girl? How much of it was the fault of her? How much of it was the fault of the characters? How much of it was the fault of society in general? And then kind of consider the idea that is somebody beyond redemption, and really try to push those themes as you move through, trying to prevent this girl's corruption or not prevent it, as the case may be. Fighting the forces that are corrupting her, and just a fun romp through the 60s. And then, of course, you get to read a bunch about the protest movement, because lots of stuff happened here in the 60s. I got to ask my parents about it because my dad, he wasn't in Madison at the time, but he was in college in the late 60s. And so I got to ask them about that, both of my parents. I think the most interesting thing was, in that era, there was a lot of, very similar to right now, where there's just lots of protests going on. Back in the 60s, cops used tear gas all the time, apparently. And so one thing that you did was you carried around a little plastic baggie with a wet cloth. Because
really?
If you randomly walked into an area that had been tear gassed, you could just pull out this wet cloth and put it over your mouth, and it would at least lessen the effects.
Yeah, a lot of people know about that nowadays.
Yeah. Although the thing was, at the time, student groups, especially in Madison, were protesting, government buildings, like, for weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. So, it just, every once in a while, the cops would just shoot tear gas.
So
you go back and you get to read about what was happening at the time and figure out, like, okay, how did the werewolves in that area at that time interact with those events? It's actually one of my favorite things about World of Darkness, because it's set in our world. You get to research things, even if it's set in modern day. Like, I've played in a mage game where we went all over the world, and almost every session, it's like you're looking up things on Google Maps, you're looking up things on Wikipedia, and you're learning things about regions and history of regions.
I definitely enjoyed a lot of the like history. You have to go back and and not just, you read something about history and then you have to go back and see a little bit further as to why, and then in the World of Darkness, you want to create you want to create connections that are beyond simple decades worth of, because usually it's like things are about a couple decades, some things are much greater lengths of time that you have to kind of figure out. But for games that I played in, a lot of the times, you want to, like, connect everything back to, what the hell was going on 500, 600, 700 years ago, and why is that, resonating all the way throughout history to this point in time, and that everything is all kind of connected. to each other is what I have a lot of fun with that. But so is this something that you're planning on playing at conventions or over Twitch?
At this point, I'm not sure. I have to find my notes that I wrote. I think they're on an old computer.
Mhm.
But yeah, I could see it as a game we could play on Twitch, or maybe as a one-shot at a convention.
Oh yeah.
That would be interesting. The one thing that I'd like to mention, though, in terms of historical games, just as a quick aside, over the past year or so, I think we stopped playing it about 5 or 6 months ago. A friend of mine, as his first campaign, ran a it's a World of Darkness game set in the 1890s.
Oh yeah, I remember reading a lot about this.
And this is how much I paid attention, because I can't remember what region it's in, but I think it's kind of like northeast of Egypt, because I played a Bastet, a werecat, and there was, geez, why can't I remember? There was a werebear. We were a bunch of were creatures who had been gathered by this person to go on a quest. And man, I learned so much about the 1890s and that region that I didn't know. And it's because this friend of mine, that's like one of his things is history podcasts, and that's one of the eras that, you know, there were so many competing factions in the area. So we got to meet like lots of different historical characters. And he actually said he wanted to do an episode of this podcast to talk about that game.
Yeah, I would definitely enjoy having him on, and we could do some podcasting about what he did in that game. And it's been a long time since I read the stuff on that, but yeah, I remember like the documents that he was putting out in emails, just to like kind of as a like spectatorial like review of what had happened. Was really awesome and just filled with lots of really good historical data mining. Like it just was epic.
Yeah, and actually, that game is the reason I know about rivers that don't go anywhere. There's a specific scientific name for it, but it's essentially like snow melt or something that flows into a plain, but it evaporates before it can get to any larger body of water. And I didn't know that was a thing, and now I do because of that game.
Nice. So the setting for this for you would the main game that you'd be using for this is Werewolf the Apocalypse, obviously. Would you include what other aspects of the World of Darkness, if any, in this game would you include?
Well, let's see. Because it's in the Madison Under Siege mythos, there might be some connection with Mage, specifically because JD is a relatively powerful character in Madison at the time, and he would have connections to at least one werewolf, whoever the werewolf is at the time, who's the person who is the delegate to the Gahara Pact.
And just to be real quick on an aside here real quick, is what we mean by this is that although all the rules and all the games, or all the stuff that he would be dealing with primarily would be werewolf aspect, we're not saying that he's taking the game mechanics of these other games and really, trying to mesh it in or have other players play a mage or something like that in the game, but it's the concept of inside the world, in the World of Darkness. It's very possible for you to say, I don't care about Mage, I don't care about, Hunter, I don't care about, or Hunter the Reckoning. But there are some main components in there that are going to kind of stick around. Like, for example, Vampire and Werewolf are kind of intertwined with each other pretty strongly. You don't have to let people play them or use any of the rules. The Werewolf book covers how to handle vampires using werewolf rules, but you want to use their lore, their concepts, what's going on. Maybe there's a few characters and stuff like that. And even inside of what we're doing here is we're creating like a greater concept for us to pull from this Madison Under Siege setting. But we as GMs, when we go into these conventions and stuff, are going to modify and use this. We're going to grab from that lore, and then we're going to use it in our games. But we're going to modify it and change it however we want for these games. So, for example, he could go into this and say, I don't even want to talk about JD, or even that mages exist in this game at all. It doesn't matter. It's not something that's important. It's not necessarily that they're going to go out of the way to be like, okay, we're going to prove that there are no such things as mages in this game. That'd be a little weird, but it's the concept that you don't have to use them at all. So
Yeah,
moving forward, you're talking about, so mage would be a little bit of what you'd be using of like JD and this concept of a powerful mage in Madison that's been manipulating stuff for hundreds of years.
Yeah. Do you have the feeling that people shy away from putting like mages into a werewolf game or vampires into a mage game? Is that your general?
I would say it's an interesting concept of this, like, people are very adamant, don't mix games. Now, the thing about it is that gets really muddled in this concept of what does that exactly mean when it comes to the internet or Reddit and stuff like that. And there are people out there who will vehemently say, when you play vampire, there are no mages, there are no werewolves, there are nothing else, there's vampires, that's it. That's the only thing that matters. It's the only lore that you pull from. Problem with that is that vampire lore has mages in it. It has werewolves. Yeah. It has all these other things that are going on. Like you can't
depends
hide, but mechanically, 100%. People are vehement that you shouldn't mix mechanics. I'm a little bit more muddled on, you can mess around with doing some stuff with that in the background. My big thing as a GM is don't let a werewolf play in a mage game. Don't let a mage play in a different game. The mechanics are just not, they don't mesh with each other too well. You can try it. You got to be, you have to have a mindset going into it that's, prepared to have extremely complex stuff that's going to mechanically mesh or not mesh at all with your games.
Yeah. Says the guy who ran a time travel campaign with a group of mages that included a werewolf.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I learned my lesson. So,
despite the fact that it actually worked.
It worked, but it was crazy.
The campaign did kind of. I felt like that campaign petered out at some point, but that wasn't because of the gameplay. It was because of other stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, in any case,
and I don't think I've ever ran anything that was the players were mixed, except for that one Gen Con game, but that was a little different.
Where it got forced on us, so yeah.
Yeah, one of our GMs couldn't make it. So werewolves were sitting at every other table.
Right. So anyways, so you were saying, though, that you'd have a little bit of mage. Any other games that you would include that you would have NPC-type characters for in this game?
I would say I would not include vampire, just because I am not personally comfortable with it. And I also wouldn't include hunter, obviously, because it's the 60s. I mean, you can only say that hunter goes further back in time than the books do for so long. Despite the fact that the main guy who creates the Hunter Academy later, his backstory is that he became imbued during the Vietnam War.
Right.
But I believe I had him coming back in the early 70s, like 72, when it was starting to ramp down. Although I'm really shitty at history, so I don't know when the Vietnam War ended.
Yeah, you better fact check yourself.
No, it was the 70s. Yeah.
So, but you would mainly have werewolf and maybe a little bit of mage.
Yeah, and mostly because I'm comfortable with mage. Uh,
And then you would have Madison as your main setting of your city, of course, for this, and like the 1960s for your timelines. Do you have any like main NPCs that you would think about throwing in?
let's
So you
see.
said JD.
Yeah. So the NPCs, the story revolves around the girl, right? And I can't remember the backstory that I came up with for her. JD might show up because there's an investigatorial aspect to it, and he would just be like a character you meet. As for who the players are, you're mostly going to be mid-level, like rank 3, rank 2 werewolves in the area. And so you might interact with some named characters that are like rank 4, maybe rank 5, probably just one. Mostly from the Wendigo tribe, but there's also Silverfang, Uktena. I think there were a few Fienna in the area, but I didn't have any named NPCs that were specific to this game. The main thing is the players are all like from Madison, and this is, you know, they are sent out to figure out what is going on, kind of a deal.
Cool.
And I do remember this. I had a sheet of 60s era slang, and I was going to give people like some sort of in-game bonuses for using slang.
Nice.
I can't remember what any of the slang is right now.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna really quickly just kind of go over what I'm kind of been doing lately with crossing or with Technogate, and kind of break down some of the main things of what I consider to be really important aspects that you kind of want to go through as you're doing world building, which is, what game are you playing? What's your primary game, which is for me is going to be Mage. What's your primary city that's of import? Where's everything going to revolve around? And that's Madison, Wisconsin. And then kind of the Umbra and other dimensions is my game for Technogate. And I plan on doing Technogate stuff through Twitch with, we run that on Mondays. But I'm also going to be planning on probably bringing this to conventions and stuff so that, other players can play other Technogate teams and play, in an episode of Technogate at these conventions where you can just run like a 3-hour game, with 3 or 4 people that'll come and play.
I really like that idea.
Characters.
I don't think we've talked about it yet.
Yeah, we haven't. I just kind of thought about it, and my idea behind it is just basically, you're one of the just random Technogate teams that everybody can kind of play, and we'll make some characters for you, and possibly even work with making new characters, like doing a new character creation before a game possibly. But in any case, the main thing that you want to really get is, what time are you? And one of the big things that I want to break into this is that, there's so much that happens in the World of Darkness, some major events that are happening. So when you pick a time, you need to kind of know what are the major events that are happening around this time and what happened just recently. And, there is huge events all throughout history that you should know just the big things of what happened, but you should kind of know the nuances of recent events that have kind of happened as well. So, for example, in my game, some of the major events that are happening in the World of Darkness that are going to heavily influence Technogate is, of course, there's the possibility of an Avatar Storm happening in 1999, which officially happens in the books. Will we do that? Who knows? Will the players be able to avert that, maybe? You never know. You can always change up however you want as a GM, and that's kind of stuff that I'm going to run with when I do these offshoot type kind of games. We'll have like its own little pocket universe that it has its own little quirks and twists, that way that Mike, even though he knows a lot of stuff, isn't going to know everything. There's the digital web with the Great Whiteout that happened when Doisatep exploded, and when that exploded, that caused a huge thing. I think it's Porthos or something like that died, who was like a huge, powerful mage. Um, and a huge chantry of power got blown up by the Hermetics. There's a huge heating up of the Ascension War that's going on. So those are some of the central themes of stuff that I'm doing inside of my game. And then there's some like I was talking with Mike about what are some of the other stuff that's kind of going on here. So I'm going to kind of go down and talk about some of my main NPCs. So I've got JD, which is our like ancient mage that's kind of running things for the traditions behind the scenes to a certain degree and visibly in 1998. And so he's a prominent mage that's in the traditions, a hermetic. And now with
But we
Doisatep
haven't met
exploding,
him.
your characters haven't met him, no.
No.
But he's a main character that is doing tons of stuff, even though that you haven't interacted with him at all.
Okay, so you've actively thought about what he's doing at the time.
Correct. Yeah. There's specific things that are happening behind the scenes that the characters don't know about.
That's what I like to hear.
And then there's Senator Johnson. He's a prominent syndicate character. State senator. Wild Rider. There's who's a virtual adept, an old, comes from back in the day, used to be part of the technocracy, and was one of the people that actually rebelled and has lived to this age, which is not that old actually if you look at the history of it all.
Yeah.
But then Maxi, which is a technocrat, a void engineer that lives in Inventus, or what was it? Inventium. Inventium.
And actually, I don't think we broadcast that episode. That was too early.
But we will have her being a prominent character moving forward. There's other stuff that's happening with her.
Yeah.
And then there's General Bridges, who used to run Technogate Command. General Cohagen, who is currently in command of Technogate, who is
General Dick
Cohagen. He likes it. He goes by Dick Cohagen, but you should just call him General Cohagen.
General Dick.
Yeah, General Dick. That's what everybody calls him behind his back. But so there's some other stuff that I'm going to be really having that's going to be prominent, and I'm not going to be grabbing a lot from all, like for this game I don't want to grab all of Vampire, all of Wraith, all of the Silent Striders, or all of the Werewolf, but I do want to have, like, I'm going to have featuring a lot of Follower of Set stuff, a lot of Nosferatu stuff, a lot of Silent Strider stuff, and a lot of Wraith stuff. And Wraith, I'm going to narrow down more. It's a little bit too general right now, but probably dealing with a lot with the ferryman stuff. So there's a whole mix-up of what I'm kind of doing with all of this. And then I'm also including a bunch of like Cthulhu stuff, and corruption and insanity is kind of the theme of my game here. So we'll see if the players can stave off corruption and insanity in such a...
Oh man. Yeah, speaking of corruption and insanity and Cthulhu, I literally just watched there's a John Carpenter film from the 90s called In the Mouth of Madness. And I'm not much of a horror movie guy, but it was pretty good. It's got Sam Neill, who was the guy from Event Horizon. It's I would recommend it.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting. Lots of like tentacled beasts.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
So we are coming up close to the end here. Do you want to get in your lore?
So this isn't actually new because I didn't work on that this week. So I'm gonna tell everybody about the Obelisk, which is something I wrote for the Hunter Academy I believe, for year 2. Yeah, because year 2 was the one where we were in the long room. So on the Hunter Academy grounds, there is a building inside of which is something called the Obelisk. The problem with hunter powers is a lot of them require a creature to use them, right? So you can't practice. Unless you've got like a room full of zombies, which they probably tried at some point. But it's hard to keep them around when people are practicing their powers. So officially, the Obelisk was, created by the guy who founded the Hunter Academy. But in reality, it was built by JD and given to the Hunter Academy as kind of a surveillance device. I mean, it's not entirely malevolent or anything. That JD just wanted to kind of keep tabs. And essentially what it does is any of the hunter edges, which are the powers that hunters have, the supernatural powers, you can use the Obelisk as a stand-in for anything that you would be targeting. The most used hunter power is Cleave, which basically just adds lethal damage to something that would normally be bashing. Of course, I changed that to aggravated damage because why shouldn't hunters do aggravated damage? Because in Madison Under Siege, hunters do aggravated damage because they should. Anyway, so
there is no aggravated damage in Hunter. Period. That's one of the reasons why we said that we could upgrade it if you interacted with other things. Yeah,
they never mention it in the books, and granted, Hunter
as good as aggravated.
Yeah, Hunter is supposed to be a game about personal horror, where you are a normal person who the veil has been lifted. Roddy Piper has given you the sunglasses, and you can now see the monsters, and you freak out because nobody else can, and it just basically messes with your mind. And you're not supposed to be able to kill them that easily. But fuck that. Hunters do aggravated damage. Anyway, so the Obelisk is something that you can target in lieu of a supernatural creature. And so the only time it ever came up in an actual game was at the beginning of the second Gen Con game, where I basically had 10 people roll one of their hunter powers so we could actually figure out how the dice mechanics work, because half the people at the table had never played Hunter. I suppose including me. I've never actually played Hunter. But I mean, in the end, the dice mechanics are pretty easy. You just gotta get to it. And
so did you do the thing though, because doesn't Hunter give them power-ups from using their powers? Like they get to gamble their stuff and
you don't have to. You don't have to gamble it.
No, but you can, and then there's all this stuff about gaining more. And so did you have it be that this didn't enhance their powers? They couldn't just spend
correct.
A couple of days here and
yeah. So
where
one
actually
of the mechanics
the room with zombies would enhance you.
Yes. Although not very fast. I mean, zombies are low rent. Yeah. So in the mechanics of Hunter, there is it's kind of like willpower, but it's not, because it goes up and down very easily. It's the conviction score.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's conviction. Yeah. It's so you can empower one of your edges with extra conviction. It's called wagering. You're basically gambling it. and if you succeed on the roll, you get all those dots back and an extra one. And then when your conviction gets up to 10, then you can trade those in for an extra dot in one of the permanent power dots.
Right.
Which,
so it's all about using your powers in order to get more power.
Yeah. And so using the obelisk, you can't gain more conviction. Otherwise, it would just be like, just go stand in there for like
a day.
Well, maybe not a day, but like a few weeks, and come out just like with 10 dots and everything. So yeah, that would obviously not work. So it can't allow you to get your powers up. But it honestly, I created this only as a mechanism to get people familiar with the dice rolling mechanics, and that's fine. It is totally fine to make something like that. Because one of my pet peeves about gaming is figuring everything out during the first combat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I mean, I get it, and it's fine, but if you can have a low pressure environment, that's a little better.
Yeah.
For players. Like, I could have just been like, hey, a bunch of zombies just showed up. Let's all have this fight. To learn how to roll the dice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe it's more fun.
It's more chaotic.
But this is the way I did it.
Yeah.
And I like it this way. Because I was just able to go around the table and be like, well, what do you want to roll? And let's figure it out.
Yep. No, I think that your players really appreciated that. It wasn't. I heard great things from when you were running Hunter. So.
Yeah, they had a good time. I think they said so. Some of them.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're gonna wrap it on up here. We're a little bit over time, but I think we're fine with that. Got some good stuff in here, and we'll continue more world building and examining the world of darkness here on Crossing Darkness later.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.